Hello everyone and welcome back to Creation Myths. This is going to be a short video and it's going to be very different from what I usually do. In just 1 hour from this release, Doctors James Torr and Rob Stadler are releasing a video about Erica Gutsa-Gibbon and myself and how we get a 2016 paper statistically evaluating common ancestry and separate ancestry wrong. The paper is titled Statistical Evidence for Common Ancestry Application to Primates by David Baum et al. And I'm going to put myself out here and make a public prediction before that video from Dr. Stadler and Torr comes out. And the prediction is this. Neither Dr. Torr nor Dr. Stadler will display an understanding of the methods in that paper, and will instead fall back on the common creationist misunderstandings in their critiques, because creationists have been going after this paper for years. And to my knowledge, in my experience, not a single attempted critique of this paper has accurately articulated the methods and why they are inappropriate. So let's talk about this paper for just a minute. This is going to be a very short video, okay? This paper presents extremely strong statistical evidence against common ancestry at the species and family level, and extremely strong evidence in favor of common ancestry. Creationists say that it is not representative of any creation model because they say the separate ancestry models only compare chance to common ancestry while ignoring the possibility of common design. That is to say, the charge is that this study ignores the possibility that the originally created kinds, in whatever version of that the creationist is proposing, would have had some built-in pattern or structure of similarity, and current patterns reflect that front-loading or common design template or whatever you want to call it. They usually lean on a single line from this paper in making this critique, and that line reads, quote, "We assume that each family ancestor at its origin acquired character states at each character independently of all other family ancestors." That's the key line that creationists lean on, and I bet in this upcoming video from Drs. Torr and Stadler, they're going to quote that line at least once. Basically, creationists claim that the authors of the paper in question compared random created states to common ancestry, rather than separate ancestry with a nested hierarchical pattern at creation, which is then still reflected in the current nested hierarchical pattern. Creationists' understanding of this paper and its methods is both overly simplistic and completely wrong. To be clear, the authors of the 2016 paper did not create a bunch of random created kinds and assess the probability of arriving at the current pattern of diversity from those randomly created separate ancestors. I'm going to very briefly explain what the authors of this paper actually did. I'm probably going to oversimplify it because I'm trying to keep this really short. The takeaway here is I bet not a single creationist has or will articulate this accurately. I would love to be wrong about that. I would love for Dr. Stadler or Dr. Torr to articulate something like what I'm about to explain in their upcoming critique. But again, I'm putting down a marker here and saying they won't, and we'll see if I'm right. Viewers, it is your job to hold me and Dr. Torr and Dr. Stadler accountable on that. I'm going to revisit this after their release, later today if I get to it, tomorrow if not, and we're going to see if my prediction holds up. But either way, there's going to be a follow-up video to this one where either I was right or I was wrong, and we're going to see what happens. That's the fun part about making predictions. You don't know what's going to happen. So here's the quick version of what was actually done in the 2016 paper. And again, my prediction is that Dr. Stadler and Dr. Torr will not articulate anything even remotely close to what I'm about to describe. The authors used parsimony as a test of phylogenetic likelihood, which basically means how many evolutionary changes do you need to get from point A to point B. The fewer changes is a more parsimonious phylogenetic tree, which we interpret as more likely. Now, in this situation, point B is the existing pattern of diversity that we observe among, whatever living things we're comparing. And then point A, the starting point, would be their common ancestor or common ancestors, depending on the model, right? So you're starting with one or more ancestors, and you have to get to what we actually observe in the genome sequences. And the question is, how can we do that with as few evolutionary changes, like mutations, as possible, right? Now, when you draw a phylogenetic tree, the lengths of the branches usually indicate the number of differences. So shorter branches means fewer mutations. In other words, a shorter tree, right, when you add up all the branch lengths, is more parsimonious. It means you had to get fewer changes to go from your starting point to your ending point. And we interpret that again as more likely to be accurate. That's the general thinking around maximum parsimony as a measure of phylogenetic likelihood. The question the authors asked was this: how well does each hypothesis explain the existed nested hierarchical pattern in the genomic data? They also talked about other data sets, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just talking about the genomic data right now. They answered this question by doing this, okay? This is the part that creationists mess up, right? They're not picking a starting point and then kind of evolving that starting point to the existing diversity, right? What they're doing is they're randomly sampling phylogenetic trees. They're just randomly sampling from all possible phylogenetic trees. We're just going to randomly build phylogenetic trees to get from point A to point B for each model and assess each of those trees for length. And then we want to compare the resulting distributions of tree length for each model to the observed tree length based on actual phylogenetic techniques. In other words, for each hypothesis, we're randomly sampling many phylogenetic trees with one ancestor or many, and arriving at the existing states at the tips of each branch. And then we're going to assess each of those trees, again, many trees for each model, for parsimony. How long is each of the trees that we generate? That results in a distribution of tree lengths for each hypothesis. Basically, we're generating a curve, right, that represents the distribution of length for all of the trees that we've made for each model, right, for common ancestry, for family separate ancestry, and for species separate ancestry. And we're going to look at those distributions and ask which hypothesis is the most parsimonious, which makes the shortest trees. And also, we're going to ask which model generates trees that best match the observed tree length. Like when you do phylogenetics on the actual data, you get phylogenetic trees. Which models come close to or even exceed those trees in terms of parsimony, right? Which models are as short or shorter than the real phylogenetic trees when you do actual phylogenetics on these data, right? The key thing here is that the authors are not assuming the absence of a pattern among the separately created trees. By randomly sampling from all available phylogenetic trees, they determined the best case scenario in terms of tree length without having to specifically characterize what the starting states would look like. In the upcoming Dr. Tor and Stadler video, I bet Rob is going to say something like, they picked random starting states, which isn't something any design proponent would agree with. That's wrong. They didn't pick any starting states at all. They probabilistically determined the best tree topology, the best tree shape, the best branching pattern, which is to say the shortest possible tree for separate ancestry with whatever starting states that entails. There's no specified starting state at kind of the beginning of any of these models, right? They're probabilistically determining what that optimal starting state would be. That's why the creationist complaint about this paper is wrong. And I bet Drs. Tor and Stadler fall right into that trap, just like every other creationist who's attempted to refute this paper. Again, that video goes live 1 hour after this one. So this is me putting myself out there. I could be completely wrong. This could be a giant faceplant, and we're going to see. Either way, whether I'm right or wrong, I'm going to follow up with the results of my prediction, maybe later today, maybe tomorrow, we'll see. And then Following that, I'm going to do a deep dive into that 2016 paper. I'm really going to go through it in detail, and it's not just going to be me, so watch this space for that. Thank you all for watching. Please remember to do all the algorithm-friendly things. Keep an eye on that Torn Stadler video that's going to go live soon. I want everybody to watch it and hold them accountable, and then whatever the results are, I also want you to hold me accountable. Thanks again for watching, and don't get fooled.